welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. Like me, I'm sure many of you have seen and heard flocks of geese flying south for the winter. For our Bird Notes program this month, we're talking about a different classification of winged migrators, birds of prey. The word raptor comes from the Latin word rapio, which means to seize or take by force, which sounds like a bird of prey to me. Thankfully, Mark LaBarr isn't going anywhere, at least not yet. Mark is the Conservation Program Manager at Audubon, Vermont. He's been flocking to Across the Fence for the last 20 plus years to talk about birds with us. Thanks for coming back, Mark.
Always great to be here.
I'm always glad to see you. So let's get started talking a little bit. We mentioned the V at the beginning of geese kind of migrating south. Yep. So are birds of prey following a similar pattern?
Yeah, so, fall is a big migratory time for a lot of birds. And so we see things like geese that are flying over that classic V shape. It means fall is here and winter is coming. But the raptors also migrate during the day. A lot of the songbirds migrate at night. And so they can be observed across the state, especially in the Champlain and Connecticut River valleys as they move down. This usually occurs September and October. And probably one of the first migrants that people see a lot of are broad-winged hawks. These are forest hawks. They're often, you can identify them by those broad white stripes on the edge of the tail there. And these are a bird that begin migrating in September, peaking in mid-September, late September. And if you go to a place like Mount Philo in Charlotte, you can see broad-winged hawks, and they move differently than, say, Canadian geese, or Canada geese, sorry. And in that they will what's called kettle. So they will take the updrafts, warm air coming up, a little bit of a north wind, and they'll form these large kettles, as they're called. And when they get to the top of that updraft, they'll glide down, move forward, and start another kettle and make their way down the valley that way.
It sounds like a long process.
It can be. There have been sightings on Mount Philo of more than 1,000 birds in a couple of hours as they move down through the valley. So, a little bit of different strategy. They're taking advantage of those updrafts, which a lot of raptors do this time of year.
Sure, but they're still going with a bunch of friends. Where are they headed?
So the broadwings are heading down in the Central America, South America. And so they have a long push to get down there. A little slower than in the spring. Spring, they want to get up here, get their territory set up, start breeding. Now they have the time to migrate during the day, and they're feeding along the way too. That's one of the reasons that they're migrating during the day, so that they can take advantage of food sources to support that migration.
Sure, a little bit of a road trip for them. So tell us about other birds that fly in kind of big numbers like that.
So my kids went to Mount Abe, and so I used to stand on the soccer field and regularly see turkey vultures doing kind of the same thing. Turkey vultures, we have that classic V-shaped form with those big fingers on the end, V for vulture, and you'll often see them kettling too, moving through. I would stand on the Mount Abe soccer fields, and I could see them moving down along the face of the Green Mountains there. So that's another pretty common bird to see. They're pretty new to Vermont, past 3-4 decades that we've seen them. But they're another one that are, you look up in the air and it's a pretty regular bird.
Sure, and where are they headed to?
They are headed further south, down to South America, down to, southern U.S., maybe Central America, things like that. They're, not necessarily long-distance migrants.
Sure, and what are some features that we should look for when trying to identify a long-distance flyer here?
So, there's a bunch when you're looking, obviously a lot of these. Unless you're on Mount Philo or another high perch and you can look down on these birds, you're often looking up. So the osprey here, for instance, another one of our migrants, has that kinked wing look. Instead of the wings being straight out, they kind of crook there at the end, and they've got those big white patches to look at, as well as that whitish head. Sometimes people will confuse these with young eagles just because they have that whitish head and they think that's what it is. But osprey or fishhawk, they're moving as well. On the other hand, you've got things like bald eagles, which, again, first off, their size, but they have that really straight wing shape that goes straight out with the fingers at the end. And of course, the adults have that classic white head and white tail. We may see juveniles, which are browner or have some white in them. but oftentimes the size is really the giveaway for our bald eagle. And then, of course, in migrating now in October, the red-tailed hawk. These are buteos, so these are birds with fat wings and short tails. Again, catching those updrafts. And here you can see a little bit of a red tint in the tail that gives you, and that band across the breast as well. That gives the red-tailed hawk away. But again, another flat thing, unlike the vulture.
Do these birds kettle as well? Are they flying in big groups?
Oftentimes they're moving. You can see them solo. You'll see them pass by individually. They don't, you may see them in formations picking up, drafts, updrafts, but they do not like the turkey vultures and the broad wings.
Sure. And those are a bit bigger, but let's talk about some of the smaller hawks that are on the
Yeah,
move.
so our woodland birds, our accipiters. These are birds that spend a lot of time in the woods. They're much smaller. And they tend to have shorter wings and longer tails. That longer tail and shorter wings allows them to navigate the woods as they're breeding and chasing prey. So one is the sharp-shinned hawk. And this is a bird that's maybe a little bit bigger than a blue jay, depending on its size. But the key component here is, again, you can see that long tail. And one way to remember it is that tail is sharp. It's straight across. And so that differentiates it from another accipiter, the Cooper's hawk, which is in the same size range, a little bit bigger, but their tails tend to be rounded at the end. So if you think about it, a C for Cooper, C on the end of the tail, and you can tell those two apart.
Great, very, very handy way of telling.
Well, as a birder, you have to come up with all these, in the spring, it's the song and all little mnemonics you come up with to remember your birds. And so this time of year, we're looking at shapes.
Great, very, very handy.
Yes, yes.
All right, we've got a couple more to look at. How about kestrels moving south?
So our falcons, okay, again, shape. We're looking at either above or below, and you look up, and they have those really pointy wings. Longer tails. These kestrels are often seen during the summer months sitting up on power lines, feeding out in fields. But these birds, one of the smaller falcons, have that really pointy wing shape. Not so much the fingers that you see on the bigger birds. And of course, a really, conservation success, not only here in Vermont, but across the Northeast, is the larger version of the kestrel, the peregrine falcon. Those birds have done really well here in Vermont since they were extirpated because of DDT way back when. But this is, you're going to see that with this bird if you get a chance to see it up close. Bigger than the kestrel, same wing shape, but it has that kind of facial pattern, that black stripe. The kestrel kind of has that too, but the kestrel is also often browner on the back and much smaller.
And I know those birds, for if you're maybe a big hiker, you like going to cliffs, some cliff sides will be closed. Is that not really an issue in the fall anymore?
Not so much. Once the birds are done breeding, they're off the cliffs, so they're not going to be disturbed. That's the big factor. Peregrines nest on a cliff, and so they're going to be disturbed if you've got climbers going up. But this time of year, birds are moving. They're not raising their young. Kestrels nest in nest boxes. They nest in holes. So you don't really have to worry too much about it. And many of the climbers, those peregrine sites open up this time of year, so climbers can get up there, or hikers up to the cliffs can take advantage of that.
So if you're looking to go up any cliffs, now's the time.
Now is the time.
All right, I think we have one more in this section in the falcon family. Is that right?
So this is kind of a separate one. This is the northern harrier or marsh hawk. This is kind of an interesting one because it's got fat wings and a long tail. But the real indicator for this bird is that white rump patch there. The males are gray, the females are brown, and they fly or often move through hovering over fields feeding with kind of a vulture-shaped wing pattern. You'll kind of see them rocking back and forth as they're looking for prey. But that if you get a chance to see that white rump, that's usually a good indicator that you've seen a harrier or marsh hawk.
And now we get to talk about one more bird that helps me add to my vocabulary a little bit, because they are crepuscular, which means, of course, they're in the twilight. What can you tell me about the bullbat or nighthawk?
So nighthawks, they are a state endangered bird in Vermont. We don't see them nesting, but we see them passing through, and they come through in late August and September. There's folks that do counts down along the Connecticut River Valley where they move through. But they can be seen throughout the state. And they have these big those white wing patches out there. They're part of a goat sucker might be, is what they're called, because if you look at them, they look like they have a very small mouth, but they actually have a very large mouth for eating insects on the fly. So this is another, they'll usually be moving at dusk, and oftentimes when people see them along the Connecticut River, they're feeding as they move down. And there's a dedicated group of folks that go out every year and watch and count these birds as they move through.
Sure, keep an eye out for them.
Yep.
And you mentioned at the top of the show a little bit, obviously these aren't the only birds on the move this time of year. What other birds can we see migrating?
So, as we move down into the, obviously you've got your waterfowl that are moving, but as we move down into the smaller birds, our thrushes, our warblers, vireos, these smaller birds are moving at night. And so they'll move at night, and then they'll come down and rest and feed during the day and move again, depending on weather patterns. And then, and one way to find out how many of these birds are moving through is something called birdcast, which you can look on your phone or on your computer. And it shows a live progress. They use Doppler radar, just like the weather forecasters can pick up these millions of birds as they move south. So that's happening over your head at night.
Sure. And when is it all done? When's most of the migrating
So,
finished?
we talk about migration. So most of the birds that breed here, migration is done, through November. Waterfowl are still moving. But then as winter comes in, we start to see the southern migration. So depending on the winter, depending on the food source, cone crop, we might see crossbills and snowy owls and red poles that will drop into the state of Vermont, spend the winter here. These can be very eruptive. Sometimes they're around, sometimes they're not. So it depends a lot on the weather patterns and the food source.
All right, great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Always fun to be here.
We're always happy to have you. And if you have any bird-related questions, you can write to Mark at the address on your screen. His email is listed there as well. And pictures are always welcome. And that takes care of our Across the Fence for today. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here at WCAX. I'm Jolie Whitney. Have a good one.